12 years later, you are an enemy of Tangier 2034. When you look at Shalamwana, what we remember her for beyond the music is even the persona she carried for the Congolese country. You know, in Congo they called her Mamu National, mother of the nation.
A very good morning to you. You are in time for BizCheck this morning. It is 10 days to Christmas Day and 16 days to next year, 2023. Well, we shall be giving you just how the year has been in terms of the business world and what has changed the economies in the world as well as Kenya during this particular show, and a little bit about startups in Kenya, the e-commerce sector, the tech sector. We shall be also having that conversation. We want to, my name is Betty Kiptum and Lensa Odingo is my colleague on the sign language interpretation. We want to join Jürgen Arnesen, the Executive Vice President at Mobile Opera. He is joining us from Norway, and we want to talk about matters tech and just how that is happening for Kenya. Jürgen, very good to see you this morning. Thank you very much for speaking with us. If you could just give us an overview of how you find the tech space in Kenya right now.
Thank you. First of all, Betty, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be on the show. I think we're very excited about the Kenyan market, specifically on the continent as a whole. With Opera as a business, we've been present in both the country and in Africa for actually more than a decade. We have a very long-term view. We see super exciting underlying growth in the market, with still relatively low penetration rate of mobile internet usage, which is of course the business we operate in. We see that it is of course from a macroeconomic level very attractive KPIs, being a very young population across Kenya and the continent, which is attractive in itself. We have built a suite of products that address some of the fundamental challenges in the region, specifically related to infrastructure and the very high data costs that you see. So we have a mobile browser called Opera Mini, which is very popular. We have around 10 million plus users in Kenya, pretty high market share, that addresses this specific challenge of high data cost. So user, if you choose Opera Mini, can save up to 90% of the data by going online via our application. So, like all in all, from a macroeconomic level, very excited. Despite, of course, there are economic challenges in Kenya now and across the world, but looking at the fundamentals, it is quite exciting.
Right. Jürgen, when you talk about the Kenyan tech space, there are quite a number of young people who are tech savvy and looking for jobs. Of course, Kenya has quite a high unemployment rate. And what do you think the tech space has to do in terms of job creation, and how can young people position themselves to take up these jobs in the online space?
I think it's a good topic. I think it is. We see Kenya being quite vibrant in terms of innovation. There is a lot of good tech coming out of Kenya, both on the fintech space, on internet services in general. Of course, we all know about M-Pesa and everything that has come around that. So I think it is quite a unique space to be in. We do have local offices in Nairobi. We employ a lot of strong, very, very talented Kenyans. So it's quite good space to be in. And of course, we try to facilitate that by helping businesses come online through our applications, by driving traffic to advertiser sites, etc.
Right. Kenyan startups have seen quite a growth over the past few years, and there has been many of them that are just securing funding and expanding. What do you think this will do for e-commerce and e-services in Africa and Kenya, to be specific?
No doubt over time it will pay off. I think there's a lot of investments being done both on the infrastructure side and the OTT side. More and more services coming online. We see, like on the let's say basic infrastructure level, with 4G penetration increasing across the country. No doubt that will just unlock additional activities, additional new innovation coming out of the space, no doubt.
Right. You talked about data costs a little bit earlier. Africa has some of the highest data costs, as you said. What is the industry doing to make sure that these costs come down, because they impede the growth of the sector?
We see this as a real big challenge for adoption. Of course, it impacts users' ability or people's ability to come online, but of course it impacts businesses. We know that, as you highlight, I think the data cost in sub-Saharan Africa is the highest in the world relative to income. So it's a real problem. I think on our part with Opera and Opera Mini, as I mentioned, we invest significantly in making sure that we reduce the cost of that data by compressing the data when users go online. We have invested in local service in Kenya and across the continent as a whole to address this particular topic. So it is challenging. Unfortunately, we don't see a significant change in that space when it comes to the cost of megabyte, unfortunately. But of course, we hope that will change over time, because it is a major barrier, no doubt.
Change over time, and I'm wondering, what will it take? What kind of policy changes will it take for that to come down?
I think it's a big question. I think it's important that the telcos in the countries and the governments have good relationship, good dialogue on figuring out how best to navigate this space. But I think it's also important that the telco operators and the governments work with service providers like Opera and others to make sure we have both technology and services that address it. And then from a, let's say, policy standpoint, I think it's hard to say specifically what should be done. I know there's been talks in other markets about putting caps on like minimum cost or maximum cost per data, etc. But I think investment in infrastructure is important to keep ongoing, build out the penetrations and of 4G. Over time, hopefully, we will see prices coming down.
Let's now talk about your operations as Opera Mini. I mean, you have a presence here in Africa. How do you compare the environment in Africa with the rest of the world?
It is unique in many senses. I spoke briefly about it in the beginning. I think what is quite exciting is that you have the very, very young population. You still have relatively low internet penetration compared to many other countries and parts of the world. You still have very low, relatively speaking, 4G penetration. So, but of course, the growth rates, when you look at these KPIs, are very, very exciting. And this is why we are present in Africa. We have been here for many years, and we think that the future and the prospect of Africa is no doubt quite exciting. Yeah.
About the World Cup campaign, could you mention a little bit about that and what you're doing?
Yeah, we see our users. We have, I think, more than 150 million users across the continent, and a very large part of our users are football fans. We know they are very interested in the Premier League, but also every 4 years when we have the World Cup, it creates a lot of excitement. So we've put together a fun, exciting marketing campaign across many of the countries in Africa, including Kenya, where we are allowing users to win prizes by participating in different sorts of games. We have this shake and win concept where users can shake their phones and participate in puzzles, etc., and predict outcome of games, etc., just to stimulate a little bit. And we're giving away to the local market. So we set aside a fairly decent budget for this, and we're running radio campaigns and out-of-home campaigns to have a little bit of fun during the World Cup. And we have made some updates in the Opera Mini application recently, where users can subscribe and watch the highlights of matches on the fly. We see this picking up really, really strongly. So too bad that Morocco lost yesterday's game against France, but they still put on a pretty good show, I think.
Indeed, it was sad that Africa is out of the running for the World Cup, but we are running still for the third position, represented by Morocco. Well, Jürgen, as we come to a close of this conversation, what are your closing remarks? 30 seconds, please. Yes, go ahead. Oh, yeah, Jürgen, I was saying, as we come to a close of the conversation, what are your closing remarks? Just 30 seconds, please.
Scott, excuse me, can you repeat that? I didn't hear what you said.
Yes, I'm asking for your closing remarks as we come to a close of the conversation. What is the future?
Thank you. Thank you. No, I just want to repeat despite seeing economic challenges now, we are super excited about the Kenyan market. As I talked about, we've come through a difficult year. We're quite excited about next year, and hopefully we can put COVID behind us for good, and we can think forward. We're committed. We're happy to engage, and I'm very much looking forward to visiting Nairobi in the new year as well.
When you do that, and thank you very much for speaking with us. Have a lovely day. That was Jürgen Andersen. He is the Executive Vice President at Mobile Opera Mini, and we have been talking about the tech industry in Africa and Kenya and just what it looks like for the future. I feel like this is a very good time to remind you that World Cup Eco KBC, we shall be airing both the third place playoff as well as the final that will be on Sunday at 6 p.m. Remember to watch KBC and just chat with us, talk with us online. We are #World Cup Eco KBC. We now want to switch gears to the economy. We want to review the economy. The year is coming to an end. A lot has happened. and we want to talk about that and how the next year is looking like. To have this conversation in studio with me is Sterling Mushiri, a tax partner at East African Tax Consulting, as well as Faith Moniki, who is an economist at Mentoria. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Karibuni sana. I will just start with maybe your overview of how you have seen this year. A lot has happened, as I have said. Sterling, I'll start with you.
Yes, I agree. A lot has happened, both at the local stage and also at the international stage. So if you look at the economy and whatever has been happening, the effects have been far-reaching, both internationally and also locally. Most significantly locally, being our elections that we just came through, which, thank God, came out quite okay. In terms of economy, I believe, and I think Faith will be giving us, talking more to that, but what has happened is that our economy has more or less recovered. It's on the way to recovery. But on the other side, we also have expenses and inflation going quite high. So I believe those are the main issues that we are looking at.
Faith, the same question?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Stanley. This year has really been a roller coaster, I would say, for us as a country and also on the international space. And mainly on a country level, because it was also an election year for us, and we know because of the history that we have as a country from the election period and the kind of tension that we get there, it tends to have a lot of effect on the economy. And so it has been quite the year, because even as the effects of COVID-19 were just lingering still, and we had the drought, and we had now the international inflation, I think it has been a roller coaster. But as my colleague here said, that as we get to the fourth quarter and as we are finishing and going to the first quarter of 2023, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and the economy looks like it's going to get rejuvenated. So there's hope.
There's hope.
Yeah.
Let's stick right there on the elections bit. When we started this year, we knew it was an election year. We were expecting a slowdown in terms of even investor confidence. How did that play out, and the eventual smooth flow of the elections? How did it impact now the economy?
Okay. So in the country, because of, as I said, because of the history that we've had before of the post-election violence in 2007, there are a lot of pre-election jitters that are usually all across the country, and even with the foreign investors. So as we near the election period, foreign and local investors back off, because they don't want to see their investments going down the drain. So they adopt like a wait-and-see approach. They wait to see when they come off the ballot, when the votes are cast and the results are out, what will happen. And then from there, they will know the next step to make. So I think that really slowed down momentum in terms of the economy, because investments were not being made, things had been halted. Also, we see a lot of businesses close at that time. People are anticipating chaos, and so businesses have closed. Nobody wants to be looted. People are not going to work. So the economy is not moving as ordinarily as it would. And so that really slows down the economy. And not only before the elections, that also during and just after the elections, before the results are announced. So that's a long period of time, you know, economically speaking, to have that kind of lag. And it really affects the economy. And considering also that people were just starting to recover from the COVID-19 repercussions that had happened, and then you have to close again because of the election, I think that really made the economy take a blow.
It took a blow.
Yeah.
Do you agree, Sterlings?
Yes, I totally agree. But what I would say is that there is something to celebrate. I think for us, the outcome of the elections, the fact that there wasn't any violence, the fact that the issues that came up were resolved properly, shows that we've come quite far as a country. And that is really, that shows a lot of confidence, even to our international partners. Our political risk in Africa is quite high. But I believe in Kenya, given that we've shown that we can have elections, that even when the elections are disputed, we'll still go to court and those issues are sorted out, then it shows that our institutions, our democracy has come up quite well. One of the issues that international investors are usually quite keen about is like the outcome when we have elections, especially where we have leaders who are very populist. They decide, once the elections have been sorted out, they decide to do things that affect international investors negatively. Legally, we call it appropriation. Yeah, and it happens quite a bit. It has happened in South America, it has happened in some countries in Africa, it has happened in Europe, Eastern Europe, but we haven't had that in Kenya. We haven't had newly coming in president saying we are going to nationalize that asset belonging to investors. So just the fact that we have a democratic space we elect leaders, especially for now, who hasn't come out and said that we're going to take up, to appropriate foreign asset, also means that we've done quite a lot. I think we're quite ahead in terms of democracy and in the growth of institutions.
Wow, that is quite some positive news. Now we've done the elections, the winner has been announced, there is the change of a bit of it. How has that panned out, and is the way the new government is settling in, does that slow down the economy, and how does this play out? I'll start with you, Stallings.
I would say, and I think I go back to what I've just touched a bit,
yes.
But the fact that we have a new government, despite the disputes that were there after the elections, that dispute has been resolved. Then we have the new government coming out and saying that we are going to proceed with the rule of law. We are going to make sure that foreign investors are comfortable. Locally, we are going to focus on the economy. That is very positive because it also shows that institutions are working. Ancient Greek philosopher said, the rule of law is better than the rule of man. Why? Because it's very easy for individuals or individual leaders to go as by their own wishes. And most of the times, because they are pushed by their own selfish needs, then the results are not likely to be positive. But if the institutions are working, the rule of law is working, and then things will tend to be objective. And even investors, local and international, have confidence where the institutions are working.
So it's very important to have strong systems at times of crisis, so to say.
Yes, and that is what we must continuously push. So we also need to see institutions that are fighting corruption working. We need to see institutions that are fighting crime working. I know we've had quite a bit of spate of robberies, and some of them have been captured online. Yeah. So if those issues are addressed, then there's a lot of confidence, even as a people.
Let's talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. The year started, we were optimistic that now we are wading through the final bits of the COVID-19 impact, and then the Russia-Ukraine war happens. We have not been immune to the impacts of that particular war. Commodity prices are on a high. There's also the inflation issue. Talk about this war and how it has impacted the Kenyan economy.
Well, that's a tough one, but let me give it a try.
Okay.
If our world now is very interconnected, so we say that we live in a globalized world. So whatever happens in the east or the west, the south or north of our world will affect us in one way or another. And I think it's over 100 years ago, someone said that if America sneezes, then the rest of the world would catch a cold. that was way back, over 100 years, and it showed that even at that time, America was quite dominant in terms of geopolitics, in terms of international trade, international investments. So whatever was happening in America was tending to affect Europe. So that is still the case because America is still a very dominant economy in the world. I think they account for almost 25 to 30% of the global economic production. So whatever happens, and remember we're using their dollars, we have borrowed money from them. So whatever happens with them, then it affects us. But now for us, we also have other things to think about. We're still trading with the other developing economies. We are trading with Russia, we are trading with Brazil, we are trading with India, we are trading with China. We've borrowed from China. So now we have another layer of, disease. So additionally, if these other countries sneeze, we also tend to catch a cold. So for us, we've been affected, obviously at the global level, from the Ukrainian issues. We are not able to get food, fuel at the favorable prices. And given that food and fuel are major imports, then our economy is really affected. But overall, I would say that globalization and the fact that we are not only, we are an emerging market, and on top of us we have the developed countries, and then we have the developing countries. Then for us, we are affected doubly to what happens with the rest of the world.
Faith, can I get your comments about the Russia-Ukraine war?
Yeah, I think I really agree because we are living in a very interconnected world. And so whatever happens out there, especially in the developed economies, there's a ripple effect, kind of like a trickle-down effect to us. So things like the sanctions, they've disrupted the Black Sea trading routes, and we have prices of energy going up in Europe, prices of coal going up in China, and all these things, at the end of the day, they come back and affect us because that means our food prices are going up, our inflation is increasing and whatnot. So what I would say is everything that happens on the global level, we are affected in one way or the other. But I think it's also a good opportunity for us to start to think of how we can be able to work with the countries, first of all, in East Africa, like how we were starting to think of, making our own fertilizer that is affordable to Kenyans, because we have seen the effect of being fully dependent on the developed countries. And so, that gives us a chance to be able to think outside the box, to be able to have like a second game. What if this doesn't work? What happens next? So I think it has its downsides, but I think we can also look at the positive side of innovation.
Right. I think before the Russia-Ukraine war, most people, at least unless you deal in that sector, most people did not know how dependent we are on that side of the world. And the President, Ruto, has been very vocal about looking regional, looking towards the African continent in terms of trade. The COVID-19 crisis showed many governments that is the way to go, and this is another crisis. Do you think that we are learning the lessons we need to learn, Stylings?
Yes, and I totally agree with what my colleague started on.
Yeah.
If at all we are to reduce the impact at the global level, then we have to start looking regional. And regional integration is the most, for us, it's the most important thing that we need to do as a country or as a region. Number one, if you look at even the way international trade works, you need dollars for you to go and buy from the international market, to go and buy from China, go and buy from Japan, etc. If the dollar goes up like it has done, then that impacts your economy a lot. But in East Africa, we've been talking of the common currency. We've been talking of just using £1 or £1 however you call it. So if you're going to Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Congo now, because it's a member of the union, if you're going there and you don't need to convert your shillings into dollars, then that exposure is cut out immediately. Then in terms of also trade, there are countries that have their own strengths. So if you look at a country like South Sudan or even Uganda, I believe they are very close to commercially producing the oil. So you can imagine if we don't have to buy oil from the Middle East that is affected by the war or the geopolitics, because America does not like you, then they'll not buy oil from you. So if you don't have to buy your oil from the Middle East, you're just buying from a neighbor, again that cuts a huge chunk from your international risk. So I totally agree, regional integration is the way to go. And at times, because we also have to think creatively, as Faith, who is the economist, said. I've seen that even the central bank wants to introduce digital currencies. Yeah, there are some countries that have tried, even Bitcoin, one of them being El Salvador, although that didn't go well, quite okay. But those are also alternatives to look at. If the dollar doesn't work for you, then why not try and see if digital currencies can actually work? But again, that's a space that needs much more research and policy consideration for it to work out.
Staying with the regional and continental integration, so to say, do you think that there is political will, there is political goodwill on that front?
On the front of working together as a region?
Yes.
I would think we have a long way to go on that front. We have a long way to go because I think it just goes back to history. You know, when you're comfortable doing something, it becomes uncomfortable to shift for that paradigm shift to happen. So it has come to show that we have a lot of trust outside Africa than within Africa, and I think it will take a lot to change that. It will take a lot of collaborations. It will take a lot of talking. It will take a lot of work, and I think that's what needs to be done. I don't think we are anywhere close to that yet, but I think it's something that can definitely be achieved. There's also a lot of politics that can come in the way of that. There's a lot of political interest that clashes, and that brings about, you know, that clash, that we can't work together, we can't collaborate, and yet we have to go to the West and look for whatever we need that might also be here within Africa. So I think there's a long way to go, and we just have to try and see if it can work.
Try and see if it can work. In agreement, Mushiri?
Yes. Although I'll slightly differ in terms of where we are. Because if you look at regional integration, the East African community is one of the most integrated. The other being, I think the European Union is ahead of us because they have a common currency and whatever. If you look at NAFTA, the North American free trade area, with Mexico, with Canada and the US, they have their issues. If you look at SADC in South Africa, they have their own issues. If you look at ECOWAS, they have their own issues. If you look at the French West Africa, who still have their currencies printed in France, then the issues are even much more. If you look at the Asian ASEAN, with their issues between China and Taiwan and Japan and all that, they have their own issues. But I think in as much as we are behind the key milestones as the East African community, we are still among the most progressive regional units.
Right, so you're seeing hope.
I think there's a lot of hope.
Okay.
I'm quite optimistic.
Right, let's go back to the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war and how it has impacted economies. The fuel prices rose. I mean, there was a time when if you were told the current price of fuel that you'll be buying at, say a year ago, you would have maybe even laughed it off. But here we are paying around 177 shillings per litre in Nairobi for petrol. So the fuel prices, how they have risen and the impact on the economy. Starlings, I'll start with you.
I think historically, fuel are global issues. If you look at the major recessions that have happened, all of them, some of them are fueled by the fuel or energy crisis. I think 1973, late 90s to some extent, although there was the tech bubble and all that. But even right now, the issues that we're going through are more or less because of those fuel issues. I know there are attempts to reduce reliance on oil by going green, investing in green energy, solar energy. But I think oil is not about to go away anytime soon. In as much as we may say that we want to rely on other means of fuel, oil will still be with us. So possibly the solution really for that problem is to try and bring online the oil that we have in Kenya and Uganda and DRC and South Sudan as soon as possible. Otherwise, we'll still be having the same issues of energy.
When we talk about now the oil and gas and the availability in the region, they are yet to be fully explored to the point where we can use it in the market. Before we get there, why can't we take advantage of the other energy sources that we have? I mean, we have a very viable solar energy space. Why are we not taking advantage of this? Faith, I will give you a second to talk about the high fuel prices, then we'll go to the solar issue. Go ahead.
So with the high fuel issue, so you can remember just after the election, actually the day after the election, the President Ruto he talked about the subsidy, the fuel subsidy, and he said that it's not sustainable. It's too costly, and so that is how the fuel subsidy got scrapped, and the fuel prices even went higher. They were already high at that time internationally, not just within the country. So they went higher, and the Treasury is saying that they've saved about 9.4 billion shillings from removing the subsidy. So on that front, what we can see is the fuel is getting higher. We remember in mid-November, around mid-November, there was a one shilling drop in prices. And I think Kenyans were really anticipating that drop because we had made that forecast, and then it was a 1 shilling drop. But as much as Kenyans are adjusting to that, and they are seeing it's more of an international problem, we have to really understand the fact that fuel and energy prices affect the whole economy. There are many things that are linked to fuel. There are many things that are linked to energy. This has made food prices go up. This has made business costs go up because these machines in the business place, their energy run, their fuel run. You can imagine the logistics of, getting food from the farm to the market. Food prices are going up, so there is a very big trickle-down effect of this fuel and energy prices, and it's affecting all other parts of the economy. So I really don't know how we'll go about that. I don't know how the future looks. There was EPRA released something yesterday, but we can see from the pump prices are going to remain the same. So at least there's that relief for Kenyans. At least there's no hike again. But I think this year we've seen historic highs in fuel prices that we have really never seen before. And we just need to find a way to go about that, because even the disposable income for the common mwananchi, because it trickles down to that, as everything else is going up, your disposable income is also shrinking, because it means you have to put a bit more for fare. You have to put a bit more for fuel to go to work, a bit more for food, which has gone, up. So consumer spending is really shrinking as well because of something like fuel prices, which have incredibly increased. So I think it's a major problem. I think it's something that we need to see how we can go about it.
The global fuel prices have come down, but Kenyan prices are still remaining the same, sterlings.
I think it's up. That comes from the way that we buy our fuel, because these rates are usually negotiated in advance through the OTC. I don't know the OTC. What do you call it? The
oil marketing
where
companies.
you buy in advance over the counter tender. I think it's called like that. So you'll see a lag. So if the global prices are going down, you don't expect for them to go down immediately in Kenya, because they are probably bought a month or two in advance. Then they are shipped. Then by the time the energy regulatory body sets the prices, they have to consider the price of that they bought in the market way back. They have to consider the rates, the dollar rates. They have to consider the rates of transportation at that time. So you don't expect, there'll always be a follow-through time, so that you take maybe a month or so before you see the real prices going down, even if they're going down internationally.
One thing I noticed about the EPRA report is that for petrol, they are maintaining those prices, but ideally they are... So the government is using the petrol market to subsidize the diesel market.
Yes.
So you'll find if you're using petrol, you're paying about 10 shillings per litre for the subsidy that the diesel users are enjoying. How does this work out in terms of even reducing production? I mean, production costs, sorry. Yeah.
I think this is in recognition that diesel powers the real economy. If you look at the big trucks, the ones that transport our produce from the shambas to the markets, they are basically running on diesel. If you look at maybe some of the factories that run generators, most of them run on diesel. But petrol is mostly used for small cars and borders. Ideally, the government is trying to just, introduce some level of equity into the market. And by equity, I mean that in terms of incentives and taxes, the government will always say that let those who pay to either subsidize the ones that can't pay, or the ones that, or just basically to grow the economy.
Right. From an economical perspective, how do you see that working out?
Well, I think I understand what they're trying to do, especially because those, just like my colleague has said, those are the big players in the economy. So essentially, it's kind of like we're backing them up because, again, they're the big players in the economy. So I don't see. I think it's a good approach, because that fuels a big part of the economy. It's better to look at them first before looking at, normal personal transportation to work. You want these big players, the people who are transporting food to certain areas, diesel for companies and all that. You want to look at them with first priority. So I understand where they are coming from. I don't know if it is a long-term solution, however, but I think for now that would work for them.
In the short term?
In the short term.
Sterlings, you are a tax expert. It has been said that the problem with the fuel prices in Kenya is not really the cost of the fuel, but the taxes. By the time they land, between the time they land and the time we get them in our cars or, in our machines, the taxation is high. What do you think can be done, or is there a way this can be brought down?
Unfortunately, we need we also need the taxes as much as we need the economy to run. And if you look at fuel, most countries in the world will tax their fuel quite high, So Kenya is not an exception.
Okay.
So in terms of what we call the dirty energy, hydrocarbons, gas, the oil, the coal, most of the countries will tend to tax them quite high. And the reason being that that is easy money for the government, because a lot of fuel is being consumed. So easy money, and the government will obviously collect taxes. The other issue is, I think, what we call elasticity in economic terms. Even if you tax fuel or things like cigarettes and alcohol, people still continue consuming them. Yeah, it's not like some products that if you introduce too many taxes, then people will say, no, I'm done with that, I don't want to pay tax. But for fuel, for alcohol, for and cigarettes and such, this is just easy money for the government. Of course, the government also says that it wants to protect the environment, but you look at it either way. It's protecting the environment on one side, but also collecting money to fund the other sectors of the economy. So if taxes were dropped on fuel, really the government coffers will not be left with a lot of money. So that's the way that we need to look at it.
Well, now that you have said that, I guess Kenyans can just deal with it, keep paying the taxes, because there is no option. We have to maintain the roads and build infrastructure and all that. Faith, give us your views on why Kenyans are not, or why Kenya is not taking advantage of the greener energy solutions. We are very dependent on the hydrocarbons.
Okay, yeah. So green energy and sustainable ways of doing things have not really been adopted much in the economy. And I would say, one, it's because that infrastructure really is not deep-rooted within us. And I can also say there aren't a lot of incentives for the businesses to shift from how they're conducting business now to the greener ways, because initially, definitely the greener ways, the more sustainable ways of conducting business are going to be more expensive. Those equipment that are going to be put in, if we need to, remove this and put solar, have smart buildings where we are recycling the water and stuff like that. So initially, there is a lot of cost that has to be put in, and then down the road, definitely now it becomes sustainable for the business. So I think there's not a lot of incentives on the business to do that paradigm shift from how they're conducting now, which is easier. You don't have to think much about, just put on the lights and life goes on. So there's not a lot of incentive on them, changing to more sustainable ways. As we've seen in the East, there's a lot of incentive for people to shift to sustainable ways. People are, riding bicycles to work even, and it's normal. And there's not a lot of incentives, and I think even our systems are not really structured in a way to support it, so to speak. So I think there has to be a lot of, first of all, education on what is a green economy, what is a sustainable way of running your business, and now ways in which we can plant those infrastructures and those structures that we need in the economy here. So you can't tell you to be cycling to work, or there at the roundabout, things might get a bit messy. So those structures need to be within the economy, and people need to be knowledgeable about it in order for it to work. And then you also have to incentivize the businesses. Why should you move from here to here, except just the fact that you're doing it for the environment. What is in it for you? So yeah, I think those are the main issues.
All right. Sterlings, I'll be getting your views in just a bit. We want to take a quick break. Remember, this is BizCheck. We are talking about the year that has been. We're reviewing the economy, what has affected the economy, what has supported the economy, and how the 2023 economic outlook is looking like. This is BizCheck. Do stay with us. We shall be back in a little bit after this break.
Bono,
Yeah.
the rock star, is out to save the world.
Yeah.
But Bono, the Moroccan goalkeeper,
Yes.
Yeah, was out to save Africa. You're my plug-in, baby.
Yeah.
Let's crucify our enemies.
And that is Smita, the musician, as well. And
Let nobody ever tell you that revenge is not.
It's a very sweet thing.
It's very sweet.
And it is a dish
Yeah, it's a
best
dish
served.
cold 12 years later. You are an enemy, wapangie tu 2034.
When you look at Shalamwana, what we remember her for beyond the music is even the persona she carried for the Congolese country. You know, in Congo they called her Mamu National, like mother of the nation.
Hii shamba fanya hivi, hii tunaweza uza.
Can you allow me to start with English and we go on? Good afternoon, morning. Ajui Kizungu hii?
Huyu anajua, wewe ndio haujui. Na alikuwa ameniambia akipata kitu tunaenda kuosi nini? Futimbo. Ulikuwa uende World Cup.
Exactly.
Sasa hukuenda kwa nini?
Si kwenda kwa sababu ndege zilikuwa zimejaa mheshimiwa.
So iko wapi pesa? Wapi slip ya bank?
Sikupewa hiyo siku, lakini ni walisema niende nichukue Thursday.
Wewe mzee unakaa wewe ni mkora.
Wakamurio wa Nzenza.
Morwa Zenza tusimujui.
Nzenza anakuambia Nzenza ni ile wimbo ya Kiliwa Nzenza. Ndio hiyo anasema.
Hello and thank you for staying with Channel 1. You are watching BizCheck and we are now going into the second hour of the program. We are discussing matters the economy in the year 2022. How has it been? How has the international shocks, how have they impacted the Kenyan economy? And what does 2023 look like? In studio, we have Stylings Mushiri. He is a tax partner at East African Tax Consulting, as well as Faith Moniki, an economist at Mentoria. Now, remember, you can interact with us online. We are at KBC Channel 1 on Twitter, and at Betty Kiptum is my personal Twitter handle. Talk to us on Facebook, on Twitter. We shall be sampling some of your views during this program. We want to now talk about matters why Kenya is not adopting more of green energy and how that is going to, or rather how that is impacting the economy. Stylings, could I get your views?
Yes, and an interesting question, I'd say. But if you're looking at the renewable energy, what we call the green energy, and the major sources are solar, wind, geothermal. Most of them tend to be intermittent. They don't happen throughout. So if it's wind, at times you will have it, other times you don't have it. If it's solar, you only have it during the day, you don't have it at night. Then even during the day, you don't have it all the time. At times it's cloudy, it rains, so you don't have it. So as my colleague said, for the renewable energies, you need a lot of infrastructure, especially for storage. For you to store wind and solar, you need to have the infrastructure. And for us, that is not there. Yeah, we still haven't come up with that infrastructure. Number two is that the traditional energy, the hydrocarbons are, I think, quite intensive. The energy concentration is higher. So you can imagine if you buy your cylinder, gas cylinder, 13 kilograms, and then you can cook for it for 2 or 3 months. You can put your 30 liters in your car and drive with it to Mombasa. But now imagine you want to tap solar energy for you to drive your car. how big of panels do you put? You'll be looking at a very high, a very huge sort of panels for you to get the same energy to cook. In fact, it may be almost impossible to cook for 3 months. Then you really need to invest. So for those reasons, then the dirty energies will continue to be more efficient than the solar, than the renewables. But even in Kenya, I think we are still, the government has quite a lot of incentives for setting up power plants, geothermal plants and such. In fact, Kenyan should be one of the biggest investors in renewable energies in the world, as it is in terms of percentage. So we are doing quite well, I would say. But if you're really looking at powering the economy to where we want to be, then we still need a bit of dirty energy, but we still need to have proper infrastructures for renewable energy put up, and also need technological advances to be made in the renewable energy space.
To give Kenya the credit it deserves, I think we are over 80%. 80% of the energy that we use is renewable energy. So we've done quite well in terms of production. But as you said, it's now for incentivizing businesses to move, their operations that way. Is it not time that we, put the investment into the infrastructure, because there is the issue about climate change? It is happening and it's affecting the world. And scientists are saying in a number of years, in a number of decades, we'll be at a very bad place. So is it not time that we go green? Faith?
Yeah, I would say it is time, and it has been time that we go green. This year we saw the worst drought we've seen in 40 years. And that is a climate change issue. So to say that it is time is, I think it's an understatement. I think we should have definitely, it needs a very long-sighted vision and a long-sighted mindset. But human weakness is we just think about now. It's cheaper for me now. It's more convenient for me now. You probably won't be there when these effects are coming. So that's probably the kind of mindset that is there at the moment. But if we are able to adopt the mindset that we are doing this for a greater future, and I think also because we've really seen the effect of the drought that happened this year, that was a terrible, natural disaster that now was caused probably 30 years back, and the global warming. So I think it's definitely something that should be happening already, and we should get the wheels rolling on that. Yeah.
Indeed, we should get the wheels rolling on that. Stylings, I'll be getting your views in a little bit, but first we want to take the viewer to Safari Park, where IEBC stakeholders are having a meeting on the past general election. Let's just listen into that.
Our observation report to the Commission to see we had about 355 observers, and all of them consolidated some of the findings, and we shall be presenting. But the few issues, and I will mention them very fast, we still have to answer, as has been enumerated by previous speakers here, the gender question, the inclusion question. My expectation this time, especially with Katiba Institute ruling, was that because we were supposed to present a third of the candidates to be of either gender, I expected at least we be at 1/3. But unfortunately, we are at 11% in terms of just candidate presentation. However, we note that it's a growing list as compared to the previous election, but we still have to look at that. I still take issue on the issue of legal reform. Some of the issues that we wanted to correct during that election, especially, this is passionate to me, the question of independent candidates. I still believe that once a person decides to run as independent candidate, he should run as an independent candidate right from the word go. I do not expect we are going to strengthen political parties if people will come through the process of nomination through the political parties, and when they failed to get the ticket from the political parties, they suddenly in en masse move to become independent candidates. I know we were committed as an IBC to close that gap, that once you decide you want to be an independent candidate, and I think that was the spirit of Article 85 of the Constitution, once you decide that you want to be an independent candidate, then you become independent candidate even before you decide to participate in party nominations. They are either way. You either participate through the party or through independent candidate. That is the only way to strengthen the party, because because the minute you jump after an election, a nomination has happened, and you become independent, then you go with all manenos against the political party, and probably you are even defeated squarely by the nomination process. Then you go with all the dirty words against that political party, and you weaken the candidate that have already defeated you. I think that is not a fair game. That's an area in this electoral cycle we need to look at, so that we strengthen and institutionalize political parties and strengthen them. The other issue is the institutionalization of political parties. Even as we question political parties, which I have some question, even me, which I question with them, we still must appreciate that they have made some significant progress. In this nomination, we have seen almost zero violence during party nominations. And I think we should clap for them. Even if they never did anything else better, they actually did nominations with zero violence. At least minimal. If there was, it's very minimal, almost negligible. Indeed, the only public incidents was when the ballot papers of one of the parties were banned somewhere in Ebu. The rest, they were minimal, but contrary to other previous elections. We saw parties doing IDRM, internal dispute resolution mechanism, courtesy of the change of law that happened in January this year. And we saw majority of the cases of the dispute be resolved at the party level. And that halved the disputes that were presented to court by half. It cut the disputes that were presented to court by half. I also want to commend IBC for the dispute resolution committee, which we are also involved, which actually was very better organized this particular time. And I think it's an area that we continue to build on, because dispute resolution is significant in the electoral process. As I finish, it is also important to look at the role of technology in elections and how we can leverage with each other's technology so that we make the process smooth. The ORPP had digital reforms to put the register of membership of political parties out there so that Kenyans can check their membership and are able to resign and join political parties online. We integrated through API addresses with the citizen data, with the person with disability data, and we were in the process of integrating with IBC. We were not able to finish that in terms of getting API address, not really integrating, but getting API addresses between the databases. And I think this time we should focus to do better integration so that we leverage on each other's services and data, and we make it smooth for electoral managers. When they are doing nomination, you don't have to have people, you just have to check yourself from where you sit, and you're able to confirm the membership of various political parties. I think that is an area that we want to focus on. We integrate the databases and try to work together. I want to stop there and commend each and every stakeholder seated here for the contribution you made to make this country better and peaceful during the last general election. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Registrar. Now I would like to invite the chairperson of National Gender Equality Commission, Dr. Joyce Mikali Mutinda. Karibu sana. Let's encourage Ashishkan.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Allow me to just adopt the protocols that have been established in the interest of time. I have a written report that I'll give. We have a publication that will be officially handing over to IEBC. But what I'm giving you is just a short report with only two things. One, what worked? What is it that we saw was the best this time round? And NG's.
Well, those are proceedings from Safari Park, where the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is having a stakeholders meeting on the past general election to just see how things went during that election. And Nderitu, the registrar of political parties, was speaking earlier and giving a report of how incidences occurred, and just saying that the number has been small. And she has also said that we still need to talk about the gender issue in terms of representation in political parties and eventually in the elected posts. Well, Gladys Mungai is on that bit. She shall be giving us a detailed report of that particular meeting in our subsequent bulletins. In studio, we are having a conversation about the year's economy, how it went and what impacted the economy. We were talking about the adoption of cleaner energy options by Kenya, saying that Kenya's energy production is an 80% renewable, but for adoption in terms of the business side, incentives still have to be given. Stallings Mushiri, tax partner at East African Tax Consulting, and Faith Moniki, economist Mentoria, are in studio with me. Stallings, talk to us about why it's important to focus on the climate change bit and in terms of its impact on Kenyan agriculture.
Okay. Maybe it's perhaps it's good to get a background on why we talk about global warming and climate change. And these are things that have come up in the last 200 years since when we got the Industrial Revolution, if you remember your history. And before then, people were using horses to move around, their own feet and such. But here comes the Industrial Revolution, and you start running machines, trains, airplanes, motor vehicles, and all of these are basically burning the hydrofuels, oil and such. Now the thing with oil is that it produces the smoke and these other gases, which ordinarily you see going up. And when they go up to the upper atmosphere, then they just form a blanket above the earth, so which means that it just gets a bit hotter for us. So that's the simplistic way of looking at what is causing climate change, that we're just burning too much oil for the last 200 years, and that has accelerated in the last 50 years when we got new industrialized countries like China and India. So that problem is a problem of industrialization, and the major contributors of climate change and greenhouse gases are really the developed countries. Number one being the US, and again now you're looking at China and such. So for now, what we are attempting to do is just to maintain things as they are. We don't accelerate as much as it has happened in the past. Africa and Kenya still contributes to very little in terms of the greenhouse gases. But that does not mean that we now join the club and start spoiling the environment, because at the end of the day, what happens is that in as much as it's the developed countries that contribute a lot, it's the poorer countries like us that suffer in terms of, because we rely on a lot on natural farming, rain. So if there are climate change and weather patterns change, then we suffer. if for the countries, the small countries, especially the small islands that are low-lying, when global climate change happens and a lot of ice happens, I think if you look at Mount Kenya, even right now on Mount Kilimanjaro, you realize that a lot of ice has gone down. And that ice, when it melts, it will go down to the sea. So the people at Mombasa or at Kilifi are the ones who will tend to feel the pinch of the ice that is melting in the upper areas. So as it is, the push is just for the industrialized countries especially to reduce on their emissions. As African countries, I think what we need to do is just to take the leadership, just like we've tried to do in developing countries, and say that even if the developed countries are reluctant to adopt measures that reduce the gases, we as Africa, because we are the ones that are most affected by climate change, let us take, let us take the leadership. Yeah, let us keep on singing that gospel, so that at least the rest of the world sees what is going on, and so that at the end of the day, the impact on us is not so much. As Kenya, I think for us the biggest risk is when we burn firewood and charcoal. We're not even talking of our biggest challenge to climate change is when we are cutting down trees and just doing charcoal and burning firewood. Even as a country, that is what I think we need to try and check on, even before we start talking about the big things that we want to be part of, decreasing the output, the global output. With that, the solar, adopting solar, planting more trees, going geothermal like we've done, that really improves a lot in our efforts to reduce the climate change.
Faith, as you had mentioned earlier, that Kenya is going through the worst drought it's had in 40 years. And part of it is because of the climate change and global warming issues that are going on. The COP27 meeting that was held in Egypt a few weeks ago, the African countries finally got the loss and damage included in the agenda. But there's an argument that right now when Africa is developing is when you want to stop the development. How does Africa's right to develop balance with now the reduction of emissions?
Okay, thank you. First, I'll start with agreeing with my colleague. I'll start by agreeing with him that the contributing factor from Africa to the global warming is minor compared to the West and all over, but we get to suffer a lot from it. So we don't, the percentage that we contribute is very minimal. It's still there, but you can't compare it to the developed economies. I think it will come down to the policymakers. The burden is on the policymakers because we can definitely find a balance between developing and developing sustainably. We can be able to get a middle ground where we will be developing, but we are not sabotaging the future of Africans, 30 years to come, because we might be very fast to develop, but you see how this drought has pushed us back, way further than we had expected to be by the end of this year. So I wouldn't say that they are curbing our development. I'm sure definitely there's that feeling because they've been developing and they've been emitting, and then now all of a sudden when everyone is thinking about sustainability, they're also, that's definitely something that comes to mind. But I think we also have to think about the contribution before they come and look at us. You have to look at how much are you contributing. You first deal with the major players and then you come down to us. But that doesn't mean that also as Africa that we put it at the back of our minds. This needs to be something that is being effected. This needs to be something that policy makers are really working on, because I think the burden is on them. The burden is on them to make the incentives. The burden is on them to make those policies, like how they said, no more plastic bags and something like that. So it's an issue of policy, and people will come to adopt that policy as time goes by. So I think that's something we really need to look into. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit now about the drought and how it has affected Kenyans' pockets. There are people who are selling their cattle for 500 shillings, per head. And when you look at that, maybe someone has a whole herd of cattle, but when it reaches that point, this person is literally being driven to poverty because they can no longer sustain the animals that they have. They have to sell at a throwaway price. How can Kenya build its resilience right now? Sterlings.
Wow. Well, I think at the end of the day, what we just need to do is that to take good care of our environment. So in terms of trees, let's stop cutting trees unnecessarily. In terms of forests, let's continue protecting our forest, and I think let's even go further to plant more trees. But having said that, obviously we also need to invest quite a bit in sustainable agriculture in such a way that even if there's drought, then we don't have crisis. We don't have levels of crisis that we've experienced this year. People dying from hunger, animals dying in the fields, and that is not even to mention the effect on our on the agricultural output, because obviously our main exports are coffee, tea, horticultural products. Mm-hmm. Again, these are affected very heavily with drought. So we are not only suffering from a slowdown of economy. Our economy is not only suffering, but even people, as you said, are suffering socioeconomically. Again, I think the government has to be very serious. This is really not an issue for private investors. This is something that, as my colleague said, it has to be pushed by government policy. If it's enforcement of not cutting trees and such, it's the government to take the lead to protect our water catchment areas and forests. If it's an issue of development in infrastructure, again, we know that it's not like we don't have water in the country. There is access to water from our main rivers, from our forests, is underground water, but we don't have the infrastructure to get that water for use. So again, since the private sector is relatively weak in Kenya, it's really for the government to take the lead in some of those areas. And where the government feels that it's possibly it needs a lot of investment, then we also have other mechanisms that are in place. The PPPs, public-private partnerships, that the government can enter into with the private sector, not only local investors, but even international investors, just to make sure that we don't rely so much on the rain. Then the other question is what happens when we have rain? Like I believe this season is relatively new. Mm-hmm. Are we going to have the same issues where farmers in Nyandarua will be complaining that their cabbages are going to waste, while other Kenyans are dying from hunger. Farmers in Narok are complaining that maize is being imported into the country, whereas they have maize that is almost rotting in their farms. So this is also an issue of just trying to organize the supply chains and logistics around agriculture. So when we have plenty, I believe it's also for the government to set up the proper mechanisms to make sure that that plenty is well taken care of. And when we have times of shortage, then we don't have Kenyans especially suffering.
Faith, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the government has to come to a point where they think of the long-term solutions, and we stop putting a band-aid on these problems, because you saw now the relief food that was being sent to the counties that were suffering the drought. This drought has left approximately 5.5 million people starving in the country, and this is a big hit on the economy. Productivity in the economy is going down. These are people who would be working, so this is not just a problem that is at face value. This is a problem that affects all parts of the economy. And so when you just send relief food when there's a drought, and then that's the end of the story, that doesn't really solve the problem. That's a very, very short-term solution. So I think what should happen is just structure should be put in place. Education on sustainable farming in those areas, setting up of that infrastructure. It's time to dig the boreholes. That now it's the rains have kind of begun. Some areas in the country are having some amount of rain, so that when we get to that point where, and it will come again because these are natural disasters, so we anticipate that this will happen again. We are not at a point where we don't have a plan B. We get to that point and people have already been educated. People already have sources of water. Like during this drought, 90% of water sources in pastoral areas were dried up. So we need plan Bs so that when we get to that point, we are not desperate. We have ways that these people can survive. They're able to have a livelihood. They're able to continue contributing to the economy and, providing for their families, and at the end of it, not dying from hunger because of poor planning. So I think just proper planning, thinking ahead, making long-term solutions that will even cost less in the long run, because we can't keep on sending relief food every time we have drought. It's better to use more now that will be sustainable throughout than to have to use a lot every time that we're having that kind of calamity. So I agree.
Right. The government is very focused on increasing production. When the fuel subsidy was being slashed on this end, a fertilizer subsidy was being introduced, and that brought down the fertilizer prices from above 6,000 per 50 kg bag, yes, to about 2,000, 3,000. How has that helped, and is it sustainable, Starlings?
In terms of areas like fertilizers, I think at times those are costs are tough to be subsidized, because as we've mentioned earlier, we have Kenyans or people who not only grow food or crops to make money, but also for sustenance. If we don't have fertilizers, if we don't have water, then if we don't have pesticides, then people are going to die. So in terms of, if you look at the overall economic strategy, these are things that really the government has to do. We have to feed our people, and it's not only in Kenya that agriculture is subsidized. I think all over the world, even the countries that do very well, like Ukraine and the US, you still find that the Americans and the Europeans, they also subsidize the agriculture sectors, so that they can produce enough. So especially here in Kenya, I think it's very critical, and that is why really the government has to allocate some money to make sure that agricultural production happens, especially at the subsistence level, and so that we don't starve, we don't have issues.
Right. So you're saying it is sustainable and it's the right way to go.
As long as, the way I see it, as long as the government is collecting taxes from the population, remember one of the ways of why we collect taxes is to support, to support the ones who can't support themselves. So a critical sector like ours, agriculture, which accounts for 25% of the economy, but out of which, like I think over 15% goes to feeding, the family, the farmer. Then if that fails, then we're obviously going to have a serious crisis. So that ideally that should go on, so long as we have a functional government in place and it is collecting taxes.
Right. Faith, your views on the fertilizer subsidy?
So the fertilizer subsidy was, I think it was implemented sometime in September, and they had first said that the first people to receive this fertilizer that is subsidized would be the farmers in areas where there were short rains at the time. And so, well, I think that was a good approach, seeing as there was serious food shortage in the country. But I think there are many questions around the fertilizer subsidy. I think there are many things that ought to be lined out, to see whether is it a long-lasting policy. In 2020, something of the sort had happened, where they had e-vouchers for farmers. So they had partnered with the agrovets and Safaricom, whereby the farmers would get the e-vouchers on their phones, and you walk to the listed agrovets, and so you can redeem the voucher for some fertilizer, and so the government would pay now to the vendor, who is the agrovet, the difference in amount. And there are two ways in which fertilizer subsidies work universally. So there's a targeted approach, which is targeted input vouchers, and then we have the universal subsidy program. So the targeted input vouchers work where you're going directly to the farmer. You're giving them a voucher, and you're telling them, use this, go buy from these listed vendors, like how they were doing with the e-vouchers, and then we will work with the vendor. We'll pay the vendor the difference in the amount. The other universal subsidy programs works how, you just go and buy the fertilizer. It's already subsidized, so the government works directly with the vendor and not doesn't reach the farmer directly. So I think we need to know what approach are they using. Is it targeted? Because targeted is usually more efficient, because there's nothing that is getting lost there. We have confidence, because the voucher is coming to you directly, and now the vendor and the government, they just go and work their things out behind the scenes, but we know the farmer is sorted. So we need to know, is it a targeted approach that they're using? Is it a universal approach that they're using? Is this something that is going to be a permanent or temporary? Are they only going to be doing this in times of crisis? Is it something that is going to go on? We also have to know, is it for all the farmers, or is it for some farmers, the farmers where short rains are happening, or is it for farmers across the country? So as a policy instrument, we need to know, how is it going to work? How long is it going to be going on for? Or is it something that we are going to be using in times of crisis? So they bring the subsidy back, you see. So I think there are many things that need to be streamlined and kind of communicated to Kenyans and farmers as well. But as an emergency, kind of like a crisis, it was a good action. As a crisis action, I think it was good, but I think now going forward, they really need to streamline some of those things and tell us, how is this fertilizer subsidies, how are they going to work? Are we paying the subsidy as a taxpayer at the end of the day? So you see, all these things, we don't want it to come and bite us later, and we start saying it's because we didn't know. So I think these are some of the things, when these things come up, we really need to know what's going on. Yeah.
Very important pointers there. Sterlings, I've seen you nodding your head a number of times. Do you have comment to what she said?
I totally agree, and I think I'm also learning something new. But if you look at farming in general, and then you consider that even this fertilizer that the farmers are buying, already we're not taxing the fertilizers, we're already not taxing the pesticides and the herbicides, but they are still not affordable to the farmer, to the common person. And that is why now the issue of the government actually putting in some of the money towards purchasing, towards purchasing the fertilizers. That is why it comes up. Already you know that when you're bringing in this product, it should be taxed, but you are not taxing and they're still not affordable. So what do? Do you say, let us leave it at that, or do you say, let us take some money from the exchequer, let us actually invest in making the fertilizers cheaper? So I think what that tells us is that our agriculture sector, really it is at a very challenged place, and that is why it needs the support that, all the support that it can get, especially from the government.
Very important indeed. We hope the government is giving it sufficient support to grow the sector. Let's talk about matters taxation. When President Ruto came into power, a few, I think, weeks later, he met with KRA officials, and he gave them a very ambitious target. Was it 5 trillion?
That was 3 trillion for the coming year.
Yeah, and 5 trillion in, I think, 2 years or something.
In 5 years.
How do you see these targets affecting the tax regime in Kenya?
Yes, so the same, I think we had discussed the last interview in more depth, but in terms of tax, if you are to reach those levels of taxation, number one is to look at the areas that we're not taxing properly. And we had mentioned that one of the soft targets is the property taxes, both at the national level in terms of income tax and at the local levels, at the county levels. Then the other thing was obviously to adopt new methods of collecting taxes, particularly from multinationals who are not paying taxes in Kenya. And that is why you can see the issue of like the digital tax coming in, and other anti-tax avoidance measures that the government and KRA are trying to come up with. The other point is administratively, when it comes to collecting taxes, then you need KRA that is empowered, that has the right tools and the right personnel to be able to collect taxes. So they need to be empowered. Again, dispute resolution, a lot of taxes we had said it's stuck at, a lot of taxes are stuck at the dispute stage, either in the courts or the tribunal. And if that system can be cleaned up so that you have more judges, you have more judges working, you have a proper functioning tribunal, you have more tribunal registries, then that is also likely to open up quite a huge chunk of taxes that are locked up in dispute process.
Faith, in these tough economic times, how difficult will it be for KRA to reach these targets?
Well, my colleague is a tax expert here, but what I would say is that I think one thing we're worried about as economists is the shocks, the economic shocks that would come about with such changes. First, we saw like the budget cut happening, and then we are seeing these very ambitious targets being put for the Kenya Revenue Authority. So it definitely, because it is also a huge shift, it's a huge change even for the players within the economy. He's talking about the multinationals and all of that. So I think it's definitely something that will need a lot of adopting, and I think it requires a lot of legal force, because there's a reason why that sector in the economy was the way it was, and now you have to convince them that we want this to change this way in order for us to collect more. And it's disadvantage to them, you know, and an advantage to the government. So you have to really see. So probably we will, I mean, KRA has to now really keep a vigilant eye, because normally somebody wouldn't want to pay more, and they are going to find ways not to do that, and that brings more problems. And so, you know, just the scandals and whatnot, just to avoid those things, I think they just need to educate people on why are they doing that. It's important to do that, not just to come and say we are putting this % more on your organization. I think they just need to go and educate these people on why are we enforcing these policies, why are we doing this now, why was this not in play before, and how is this in the long run good for you and good for me and good for the country at large. And I think when everybody is at the same space, seated at the table, they will be able to understand, and it will be an easy transition instead of, you know, just implementing, directing, and, you know, kind of just saying, ordering, you know. So I think that's a big play in this.
Starlings, do you foresee an increase in taxes? I mean, the common mwananchi, should they be concerned?
Hopefully not in terms of the rates, but there are those, you know, there are those areas that have not been taxed before. So you'd expect that the government and KRA will try to get taxes where taxes have not been collected. That is locally, and as well as you know, with foreigners who do business in Kenya. But it's a balancing act that we have to get into, because at times if you tax too much, then also you discourage investment. So at times in some sectors you may decide that, yeah, let's reduce taxes in this sector so that we can encourage investment, and those investments, hopefully in future you are going to get more taxes from them. But in terms of the common basic goods, the common mwananchi, then I think the common person is still you know, not very well off, so you don't expect a lot of taxes being imposed on the common mwananchi.
How about the small businesses that run the economy?
The small businesses, in taxes we say let every person contribute to their ability. So for those who are paying taxes, you don't expect them to be imposed with more taxes and more administrative procedures that will impair what they're trying to do, and that which may in the long run also affect on the taxes they're paying. But there are the small businesses that by law they are required to pay taxes and they're not paying. Then those ones at least need to comply. And I think when everybody pays taxes, then the burden almost on everybody else becomes much lower.
Right. Let's shift gears to the dollar strengthening and the shilling weakening. Could you tell us how we got to shed about 6% of the shilling value this year, Faith?
Yeah, the shilling has really weakened now about 6-point-something%. And I think generally, even historically, the US has been a very healthy economy. And now, if you compare it to us, the US has been a very healthy economy over the ages. And I think what has made them become strong, even compared to other currencies, is the fact that they were really active in the fighting of inflation. When inflation began, globally, the Fed, they started increasing interest on the dollar, and so that was a very good move by them at that time. So despite the inflation all over, their currency still remained strong, and that has really affected us as a country because we can talk about imports. It becomes very costly for us. And also another thing now that we are battling with is the foreign debt servicing. So you can imagine with all the debts that we had, and then now we have to pay them back, and we have to pay them back, in a foreign currency, and the exchange rates are through the roof. So that is really coming back to bite us. But however, inflation all across the world is there, and currencies are struggling. The rupee is also really struggling. But I can say for the US, the dollar is usually strong, normally. And they made a very good move when they were increasing the interest rates during the inflation. And I think that has really, really assisted them throughout. So, yeah, we will see how that plays out. But it's really, we are using a lot of money now to be able, especially to fund our foreign debts. Yeah.
Servicing debt is becoming very expensive.
Exactly.
For Kenya.
Yeah.
Sterlings?
Yes, I totally agree with her. The issue of the dollar strengthening, it's an issue of demand and supply. So basically, if you need to buy anything in this world from someone who is not in your country, or if you need to move money from a country to another, you need to get dollars. Because you can't just, like for us, you can't just take your Kenya shillings, go to Dubai, buy your car. You need to exchange your Kenya shilling to a dollar first. And the country that controls the dollar is the US. So everybody wants to get dollars from the US, whether locally or directly from them. So at a time like now in Kenya, where the government is spending a lot of money to pay back their debt, they still have to collect dollars, basically. They still have to go to central bank and exchange the Kenya shillings that we have in our accounts for them to pay back the debt. Remember, the private sector is still trying to run. So you still have me and you. We want to buy your iPhone. So again, you're using your dollars too. So there's a competition for those dollars. Then, and I think which my colleague has said, when you get to a time when economically people are worried, like the war in Ukraine has happened, and the investors are fearful, or when Kenya we had our elections, they are fearful, what is going to happen to my investment in Kenya because of elections, or because of the war in Ukraine, the investors in Europe are fearing what is going to happen in Europe. So I need to take my money from Russia. I need to take my money out of Europe or any other country. Then again, there's a rush for dollars. So there is more demand for dollars. Then it means that the other currencies will just naturally weaken.
Right. So as we come to a close of the conversation, we've talked about quite a lot. But how do you see 2023 looking like? I'll start with you, Faith.
I think there's a lot of hope for 2023. Investors' trusts have kind of been regained, firstly because of how the election was conducted this year. So we can definitely see that there isn't going to be much lag or much disruption around, any time that we're having the election period in the country. So I can say that's one of the things that is really looking up for us. And more so because it looks like the elections and election process are moving away from the whole ethnicity that had really covered us as a country. I think, definitely things are looking up. The economy is recovering from the lag that was the election, from, still some lingering effects of COVID-19. The economy is opening up. I think there are very many new things that we are still waiting to see how they pan out. We have the Hustler Fund that is there now. We are still watching and waiting to see, is this, the saving grace for our MSMEs? Is this the big break we've been waiting for? And so I think there's a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of hope and anticipation for good things. And I can say that there are a lot of policy changes that are happening that we are waiting to see what will be the effect in 2023. Otherwise, the economy is definitely looking up better than, how it was earlier in the year. At least some rains are coming through, and the situation is getting better. So what I think the big question is, in this time where things are not so bad, what is the government doing to maximize on what we have now for 2023? So I think we are just hoping and watching and waiting to see how will our Q1 2023 look like.
Hoping and watching and waiting. I like that. Sterlings?
Equally, I think for 2023 I'm optimistic, given that we've had some very tough 1 or 2 years and things are improving. Going forward into 2023, the government has its work cut out. I don't know, this is a new government. I know they had promised quite a bit, but if they can achieve some of the promises that they have made, especially with the economy, then all will go well. Then I believe the things that the government needs to invest in, number one, to make sure that our economy grows or at least stabilizes, the infrastructure. I think we had the gentleman who you interviewed earlier on saying that we still need communications and energy infrastructure worked on for us to have a good atmosphere, economic atmosphere. Then number two, security is also very key, very, very important. I know before we started having the issues of COVID and such, we had the issues of terrorism, from 2010 and thereabouts. And I think our economy, especially the tourism, has never really recovered. So this is again another sector that the government needs to work on. Then the other one is the rule of law and making sure that institutions remain strong and they are strengthened. So that issues like corruption, issues like crime, issues like bad elections going forward, those become an issue of the past, and we attract investors naturally, without having to lose out to the international investments.
Right. Thank you very much for your thoughts and speaking with us and sharing your knowledge on the economic issues. That is Sterlings Mushiri, the tax partner at East African Tax Consulting, as well as Faith Moniki, an economist at Mentoria. We have talked about the 2022 economic year. How has it been and what 2023 looks like? That's it for BizCheck this morning. Tamrini is coming up here on Channel 1. My name is Betty Kiptum. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Bye-bye.
Argentine player, so right call by the Italian match official. But now yes, there's a chance here, and taken out. Penalty and the yellow card. Just how they lost concentration, this Croatian side, to be exposed wide open at the back, and the yellow card for Josko Javiero. So then they were on the ascendance, and that looks like he's got some pain in the wrong areas that can be very painful for a man there. Dominik Kovic, hoping to protest that decision, but nothing given. It's actually Kovac gets the yellow card. Apologies about that. the Chelsea man into the ref's book.
Of course, I think they open up all of a sudden because they were passing, and they
Bono,
yeah,
the rockstar, is out to save the world.
Yeah.
But Bono, the Moroccan goalkeeper,
yes,
yeah, was out to save Africa. You're my plug-in, baby.
Yeah.
Let's crucify our enemies.
And that is Smita, the musician, as well. And
Let nobody ever tell you that revenge is not sweet.
It's a very sweet thing.
It's very sweet.
And it is a dish
Yeah, it's a
best
dish
served.
cold 12 years later. You are an enemy